In recent news, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, has told the European Union Parliament that she would like the Union to create a European army. But wait a second, doesn't Europe already have NATO to protect it? So what's going on here? Well, let's take a closer look at why this might be happening and what's going on. So Merkel wants a separate European army from NATO, which is a US-backed military defense system. Now, it might be raising some flags that Europe wants to distinguish itself by creating a separate army when it already has NATO, but let's go further into what all this is and why she might be saying this now, as opposed to decades before when Europe had NATO since World War II, why this is coming up now. So one main reason is that the threat of Russia in recent years, especially after the annexation of Crimea from Ukraine around 2014, is certainly a reason why Europe might feel that it needs to separate itself or create a new defense mechanism against a new threat of Russia. Again, NATO already has a system in place to stop aggression against Europe, but it would seem that Europe wants to have independence in protecting itself. And I should note that maybe this is a opportunity that they're trying to get more power in their own defense. But that may lead to some problems. So let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about the European Union itself. So it was started mainly as an economic confederation, if you will, just to tie the economies of Europe together to promote peace through commerce and a shared economic system that might lead to interdependence. However, in recent years, it seems like the national governments of the European Union members has been diminished, especially with actions like this, trying to create an army that seems like it would be overarching or superseding the national governments. So in other words, and I'm not sure exactly what Angela Merkel's plan is, but if the European army negates the existence of the French army, if you will, then it seems like that would nullify the power of each individual member's military in favor of this continental army. I'm not sure exactly what her plan is, but unless every nation in Europe maintains its own army separately and then only has to come together when there's a threat that they have to come into this European army, only when that happens, or if they're dissolving their national armies in favor of this continental army, I'm not sure. But it certainly seems like it's giving a little bit more power to the European Union and less power left to the national governments of the European Union members. And again, NATO already exists. There already is that presence there, but maybe they don't feel they can trust the United States as much because the United States backs NATO so much. So maybe they feel like they're trying to break away or create a fail-safe. But it definitely seems like this is maybe unintentionally consolidating power for the European Union, giving more power to the European Union and less power to the national governments of Europe. And so, I mean, the fear, I guess, to me is that eventually the European Union would become the government of Europe, and that the national governments would be like states of the United States. They would have governments, but they would be completely subservient to the European Union national, or, well, I don't know what you would call it, federal, but to international government. So it seems like a consolidation of power. Maybe, and it's probably unintentional, but it seems like that's the way it's going. So, around the world, there are other organizations like the European Union, and I think it's important just to talk a little bit about that. So in Latin America, you have the Organization of Latin American States, okay? So again, you have these individual nations in Latin America, but they're all part of this organization. And I don't know how much power the organization has, but certainly, again, it's like this regional government that I guess is over the national governments of Latin America. Again, I'm not sure how much power it has in relation to each individual government, but it's a regional government, okay? And in Africa, they have the African Union. Again, it's similar, where all the African nations, or most of them, are in this continental government that, again, I'm not sure the extent of the power it has, but it's an attempt at a regional government. The countries still exist, obviously, but there's like this government on top of it, or attempt at governance above it, above the nations. Okay. So I guess my concern is, and I would say the concern here about what Merkel's trying to do, is that, is it giving too much power, to a government that's increasingly, governments that are higher up, have more power, maybe are less accountable per se. It's hard to say, but could be less accountable. And does all this eventually lead to kind of a global government, or regional governments eventually all getting to a one world government? Now, some people would say that, that's not necessarily a problem to have a one world government. My opinion is, one world government's not necessarily bad, but you would want, the majority of people would have to be good. And when I say good, I mean the majority of the societies of the world would have to be, a lot less tendency to corruption. There would have to be citizenship values. Just in other words, I guess my point is, like, okay, so if every nation has its own government, right, and at any point in time, right, things can happen, and any nation can have a bad government, right? There can be tyranny in that government because various things can happen, right? And so that government of that country could become tyrannical. Okay. Well, it's one thing if one country has a bad government and it becomes tyrannical, and that within its borders there's tyranny. But maybe there are other countries that have better governments that people can flee to, right? And whatever countries have tyranny, it changes based on circumstances. But if you only have one global government, or only a few regional governments, that seems like there's less of a ability to go to another place, because if there are less governments, right, if it's consolidated to a point of only one government in the world, or only a few, then if those were to become corrupt, or the one world government were to become corrupt, then what recourse do you have, right? So in other words, Germany, it got corrupt to the point of Hitler came into power, and obviously, okay, there were other countries like the United States or Canada or Australia that had much, good governments that people were safe to be there in those places for the most part. But if a Hitler took power of a one world government or a regional government, obviously you can see where do you go? What's the recourse if that government or only the few regional governments got taken over by tyranny, right? So it seems like it's better to divide the power by many countries so that there's not so much power in only a few hands or only one set of hands, right? Yeah, in other words, a police state, right? You want to divide that power up. At least in my opinion, if the majority of people were good and you could trust that the government's going to be okay, then a global government would be okay as long as you have a pretty good assurance that global tyranny, global police state's not going to be a danger or a big danger. Okay, so back to what we were talking about earlier as far as the European Union. So what I would say is that there needs to be a balance, right, between nations working together and national sovereignty, okay? So you want nations to help each other. Obviously, you don't want every nation out for itself. That's not, not completely at least. I mean, there should be national interest, but not to the point of there's no global cooperation. So there should be international cooperation, but at the same time, there should be a balance with national interests, with national governments. Okay? So that's what we want. We want that balance. Now, right now, what do we have right now? Well, we have international law, right? And international law allows for, certain issues to be taken care of outside of national borders, right? Okay, so there's norms that are supposed to be followed by all nations, or at least the ones that agree to international law, which is almost all of them. And right now, of course, we do have the United Nations, okay? So we do have this forum that, although it's not perfect, it is a place where all the nations can come together and they can voice their concerns, they can vote. Obviously, there is the Big Five that has the majority power, which is Russia, China, U.S., France, and Britain, and they have the majority of voting power. I mean, in the sense of the big decisions. But every nation does have a voice if they're in the UN. Palestine might not have a voting voice, but they have a seat. But most nations have a seat and a vote. So that we do have that. It's not perfect, but we do have that forum for global nations. Okay. So, and again, nations should have their own ability to have self-determination in what they do to an extent, as long as international law is followed. So obviously, if a nation decides to commit genocide, that's not within self-determination, obviously. But if a nation decides, okay, we want to be a republic, or we want to be a monarchy, or whatever else, right? That should be up to the nation to decide. But if a nation decides we're going to invade another nation, then obviously that would, international law would come in again. Or if a nation says, we have free elections in our borders, but they only have one political party, that would be where you would step in and say, well, and you wouldn't force them, but you would just say, that doesn't look democratic, or blah blah blah, or whatever it is. Again, there's a balance between international law and national interest. So I would say that as far as this European army, I understand where they're coming from. I understand they want to protect themselves, and maybe they don't want to rely on NATO. Maybe they don't trust that NATO will step in to stop things. Obviously, NATO didn't stop the invasion and annexation of Crimea. Not that I don't know if Ukraine was in NATO or it was not in the European Union yet, I don't think, but it has not been, I guess. I'm not sure on that. But so obviously NATO, it didn't stop the invasion of Crimea, so maybe Europe feels like, maybe we should have our own army. But on the other hand, that would seem like that would be a consolidation of power, like I said. So that, again, that's a hard thing to say on that. But I guess I would say if there were European armies separate from NATO, there should be checks and balances put in place to make sure that they limit the power of the European Union to use this army. Maybe every member has to vote to use the army or not. I mean, obviously there should be checks and balances to make sure that they control it, yeah, so again, balancing that power, checks and balances to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand and it doesn't give too much power to the European Union. And I don't think Merkel is intentionally trying to do that. I think she's worried about the security of the European Union. So I don't think her intentions are bad. I'm just saying, just be careful and be wary of the consolidation of power. Okay. So I guess, in my opinion, they have NATO, rely on NATO, I guess I would say. In my opinion, don't do the European army because it seems like that would be too much of a power grab to the European Union. But I get it. I understand it. And so that's up to the European Union to decide ultimately. Okay. I'm just saying, be careful. Just use caution, I would say, to Merkel and to the European Union in this decision. If you don't intend to make the European Union the regional government of Europe, and if you don't intend to erode the powers of the national governments of Europe, then be careful with this move. Okay, that's what I mean in all this, is that just be careful where you trod on this. So I want to say thank you to my subscribers, and don't be afraid to comment, to like or dislike, whatever obviously if you don't like it, that's okay. Thank you for watching.